All right, welcome back to the podcast. Welcome back to Theory and Theology. Let's just jump into it. If I can focus enough, I'm kind of gonna be talking about paganism, as in ancient Canaanite beliefs, as well as Judaism. Primarily from the perspective of monotheism and polytheism. So the two things right away that usually pop out, other than just people trying to have like a certain style about their clothing when they're more conservative in Judaism, and maybe sometimes, I don't know, well, that would mainly be a main outward looking thing, at least in current day. Really conservative Jewish people, at least males, would have some kind of a head covering overall. More Orthodox would have different styles of clothing, such as like a jacket, shirt, slacks, and dress shoes, wearing like tzitzits and a yarmulke, or without the jacket and like a white shirt or button shirt, and a yarmulke. There's some things like that, that other religions don't necessarily wear in that specific way. Especially the tzitzis, like those tassels on the garment. The katan, what's it called? It's not katan gadol. It's the other one. Anyways, yeah, there wouldn't be that much of a difference of a look. I mean, there would be a lot of a difference of a look. I mean, other than, that's if a person was a very religious Jewish person, or dressing in those certain clothing, even if they didn't consider themselves religious or conservative in that way. Overall, other than those types of clothing styles now, or even potential clothing styles differentiating that may have existed in ancient days, which I don't really know, because I don't really know about like styles of clothing like way back in ancient like Mesopotamia kind of area. But the Canaanites, they had a religion where they had a god named El, and I believe there was Asherah and Baal. Some people say Baal or Baal, Baal, not Baal like a Ball, but Baal. So going back to those kind of roots, other than the monotheistic belief of, having one God in Judaism versus like ancient Canaanite religions, having multiple gods, especially in the major religion, other than that, some of those clothing styles, and then like the worship of idols, the idols for Asherah, for Baal, and for El. So I was listening to something that was talking about how it's possible that, it's hard to know the difference between, were the early, very, 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 very early Israelites, the ones who were in contact with the Canaanites, possibly even before they were called the Israelites, because they weren't always called the Israelites, were they connected to monotheistic beliefs, meaning only believing in one God, that God being one of the Canaanite gods, El, only believing that God is the only God that exists, and that the other gods that any other culture would be worshiping would not be accurate, or believing or acknowledging that there are other gods that exist but only worshiping one of them. And I also found it interesting that potentially that God El is the one that came into Judaism, and the whole pretty much Bible is beginning with El, or God, creating the heavens and the earth. But in the Bible, it's written as Elohim. It's not written as El. So I don't even know. I mean, being raised in a Christian tradition, I was always taught by the people who did know what Elohim meant, that did notice that it was plural. A lot of people in Christian Bible tradition say things like Elohim is the Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. That's the only thing I've ever heard, other than people saying, no, it's not multiple gods, even though why is it plural? I mean, it's within the first sentence of the Bible in Hebrew, within the first few words. Yeah, like the first words are in the beginning God, and it's like, Bereshit is like in the beginning or in the origin, and then bara Elohim, I mean, those are the first three words pretty much, but I mean, like, if you add like particles and things like that, but yeah, if that God is Elohim, being plural, El is singular, Elohim is plural, and the thing that I wasn't usually 100% sure about was like on the sixth day, where God said, let me see. I don't remember if there are any other parts of the creation story that say, let us, like as in let us, like not let me, but let us. And I don't know how that translates with the actual Hebrew text. If that's let us, kind of like when you are talking kind of to yourself and it's like, we kind of say things like, let's get out of here. Like, I don't know if you kind of say that to yourself, but you're like, let's get out of here. Kind of like if you're trying to like drive or get out of like maybe like a parking garage that's like really packed and you're by yourself. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of an example where people do kind of say that, like, let us do this or let us do that, when it's not more than just one person. People do kind of just say, let us but I don't think that's a very common way of speaking. But I don't know if I've ever read a Bible version that says, let me make man in my own image. It's let us make man in our own image. That part always kind of confused me too. I was always just like, what? Like, why is it worded like that? Because, I mean, people do kind of talk like that a little bit, but it's not very common. But just, with the Bible, it's always just interesting. It's like, I tell you guys, sometimes I can't even get past the first sentence without being just like, what is going on here? Like, I'm already confused, Like, I already need, like, what's that game where you get, like, the lifeline or whatever? Like, can I call a lifeline? But it was like, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or something? But yeah, so there's that. And there's this other point where it's like, like I was kind of thinking, I was like, okay, like, so Islam came after Christianity. Christianity came from Judaism. Judaism, at least according to the Bible, the story starts with Adam and then Eve, with Elohim creating all the earth and everything and all these animals and everything that exists naturally. In a 6-day period, and on the 7th, he rested. And so there's that, right? Where it's like, okay, if that's where things start and end. But I don't know of any religion that doesn't have a story about how somebody was created somewhere. The Quran has a story that's different from the Bible. It talks something about like blood clots, something like that. I don't know, but either way, the God Allah is the one who was creating people, and they do talk a lot about like Hebrew lineage, about Christian people. It seems like Christians in the Quran are more liked than the Jews, but they're both discussed at length. Usually there's like these comparisons of like the people of the book and all this kind of stuff, and there is some kind of like, okay, don't be like them, and then when you read the Old Testament and kind of New Testament Bible, you do hear some of a message of like, don't be like them, but those people had another type of people of their lineage as well that might have, I mean, I'm speculating here, but I'm guessing, because something that I was thinking about when I was studying this other stuff, I was thinking about not only all this El stuff, the El and Elohim and let us and our and all this kind of stuff, not only that stuff, but I was thinking more on, I lost my train of thought. Oh, so the idol to Baal, is it like a calf or something? A bull or calf, or I think it's a calf. And in Exodus, remember in Exodus at the 10 Commandments, like around Exodus, like in the teens, the 20s, near the 10 Commandments. I mean, the 10 Commandments are in like Exodus 20. So I think it was after that, or one, I don't remember. Moses went up the mountain a couple times, but up Mount Sinai. But One of the times when he left, or wherever he went, I don't remember, but one of the times when he went away from where the people were, when he came back, the people had melted down all the golden objects to create a golden calf. And I always wondered, I was like, that part to me never made sense, right? Because all this time, all of Genesis, pretty much all of Exodus, you see in Genesis, creation and Adam and Eve and all the lineages up to, I don't know, like Moses, up to what's his face, Noah. Then everybody gets wiped out and nobody's left but Noah and his people, and then those people populate the whole remainder of the earth. Everybody else supposedly dies in this flood. Everybody. So that part already confused the heck out of me, because I was always like, okay, if everybody died and Moses and his family, not Moses, I keep saying Moses, Noah and his family are the only people remaining, and they're Jewish or of that lineage, then why wouldn't everybody else have been Jewish after that if they were the ones repopulating the earth, right? That's another subject for a whole different time. Like, I don't know. I don't know what happened to the Nephilim. I don't know what happened to them. Did they get destroyed in the flood? Were they even humans? Because it mentioned, the sons of God, or the Nephilim, or whatever they were having sex with the daughters, with the women, the human women. But these other beings weren't considered humans. They were either a mix of humans or something else. And that process created some other kind of thing, being that was, I guess, part human, part somebody else. I don't know if they got destroyed in the flood. I don't know if the ones who were mating with the humans got destroyed in the flood. I don't remember. I'd have to reread it, but I was always confused as to, like, okay, well, if people say, I don't know, I don't even know what to say. So basically, all these people who come from Noah's lineage are then not Jewish. So where'd they come from then? Because you would think, okay, everyone should be able to trace their lineage back to Judaism then. So I don't know. Like, there's other races, there's all different types of stuff going on that I just don't understand where the other people came from. But anyways, that was way before, and then eventually you get to, Joseph, and, being the son of Jacob, whose name changes to Israel, and then the Israelites come from Jacob's lineage. If you remember, Jacob and Esau were brothers. From Abraham's, am I right? From Abraham's son. So Abraham's sons were, I could be getting this wrong, because one of them was Sarai's son when, so Abram and Sarai became Abraham and Sarah. Sarah was no longer barren after a certain point. So who was the one that almost got slaughtered as a sacrifice on the altar? That was Sarah and Abraham's son, because there was Hagar. That's the lineage of what is it? The Muslims. The lineage comes through that route. I can't remember that brother's name. I'm blanking on their names. So Isaac, right? I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. Because Isaac's the one that almost gets sacrificed, right? So then is it Isaac that has Jacob and Esau? And then Hagar has... Dude, I'm gonna have to look this up. I'm so confused. I'm not even... This isn't even what I'm trying to talk about. It doesn't really matter. It's not really what I'm trying to say. But I'm really rusty, guys. This is not good. I can't even spell. Ishmael. Okay. And then... Let me see. Oh my gosh, where are they having like this huge list? Yeah, so Ishmael was the first son, which was Sarai's maid, Hagar's son. Is it seriously raining? So Isaac is the second son. And so Jacob and Esau were from who? Okay, so Jacob and Esau were Isaac and Rebekah's. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and Esau. So Abraham tried to sacrifice Isaac. Jacob and Esau were brothers. Jacob becomes Israel. The Israelites come from that lineage, from that line. And then all you really hear about is the Israelites from that point on. They go, they're wandering around in the desert for 40 years. Moses is leading them out of Egypt. Because if you remember, Jacob is the one who had all of those sons. One of them being Joseph. And Joseph is the one who goes into Egypt, gets sold into slavery after his brothers throw him down a well, all this kind of stuff. And so, eventually, the Israelites get enslaved, and they basically stay there for I don't know how many generations in Egypt until Moses, the plagues come, and Moses, all the whole let my people go thing, and then once the Pharaoh's son gets killed by one of the plagues, he gives permission for them to leave, and then they eventually get chased. That's how they leave, by that water that splits, and they went across the sea or through the sea or whatever they did and got away, and were wandering in the desert for 40 years. During that time period, they come upon Mount Sinai, that's where Moses goes and gives the, mind you, Moses came out of Egypt. He was not a baby, you know. He was raised in Egypt, not born there, but raised in Egypt, and came out of Egypt with everybody else, all of his people. And these are the people at Mount Sinai. And when he goes up the mountain or wherever he goes, these guys are down there building a golden calf. So all that to say, if they were monotheistic the whole time, or only exposed to monotheistic religion, if they were only being, not cleansed, but if they were only kind of just like this belief of how the Bible's written, that, they were there in the desert, and then, in Egypt, and then Moses brings them out of Egypt. They're complaining, like, you brought us out of here to die. We're going to die. They weren't necessarily like the happiest people. And I was curious as to if they were wandering, or if they were nomads or becoming nomads, or if they were really like lost like that. Because none of them probably would have known how to leave or where to go, because they'd probably been there for generations. I don't know the timeline, but they've been there for a while, long enough for Moses to grow up. So they've been there for a while. And then, so let me see. Am I mixing up Moses with somebody? Now I'm getting confused. Because who was the guy with the burning bush who was a shepherd for like 40 years? I don't know. Whatever. I'm going to have to look all this up again. But basically, the Israelites wouldn't have known, basically, to build a golden calf. They seemed skilled at this. They seemed to know what to use, so that they could worship it, so that they can make it, because it didn't exist, because they were out there already in the desert, and they weren't worshiping it before, and the commandments didn't exist before this, really. And so once Moses comes down with the 10 Commandments, I guess that's the first time, because when he comes down, he breaks them because he's mad at them because of all the stuff they were doing. But the 10 Commandments are very interesting, because the first commandment is, loving the Lord your God with all your heart. And the second one is not to build any graven images or idols or bow down to them. There's a whole list of like anything that's in the earth below, or the waters under the earth, or in the sky above, and all, nothing. Like, you don't build anything out of any type of material to make it, to worship it. And they were doing just that. So I don't know if before the 10 Commandments came, if they weren't supposed to do that, or if they knew not to do that, or if they all knew not to do that, or if some of them knew and not all of them. That's something that, I was never really taught too much about. Like, usually it just assumes, like, okay, like, usually they take it from the perspective in Christian churches of, oh, like, they were worshiping this thing because they didn't trust in God, or they were worshiping this idol because Moses took too long, and their faith wavered. But I mean, no one really talked in my upbringing, at least in any circles I was in, no one ever spoke about that they were probably coming out of a place or from a tradition in their previous history where they had, or their ancestors had, acknowledged Baal and had created idols to it, and I mean, they knew how to make it. I mean, like, if somebody told me to make an idol of a god to worship it, unless I had a god in mind that I actually kind of knew about and how to make that idol, what is it supposed to be made out of, like, I wouldn't know unless I had experience with that. I don't think I would just know, like, oh, choose gold, it has to be gold. Like, yeah, they're in the desert, but it's like they couldn't find anything else to build it out of. I mean, how do you even melt down gold? I mean, what were they doing? They had to have some kind of a setup somehow where they were creating fire and melting something, molding some kind of thing. Like, you can't just like do that, without knowing how to do that process. Like, it's not something you just like wake up one day and you're like, hey, I think I'm gonna like build this golden calf to worship all of a sudden. Let me go tell the whole nation and they're gonna do it too. It's like, you would think if it was a minority of people doing it, that they would have known not to do it or thought not to do it. Like, that was the first thing that kind of came to their mind. It seems like it's almost like if you went to, I don't know, say if you went to the border. I mean, I've got no problems on my end with any of the borders, but say if you went to the border, and you had a leader with you in your whole group, and your leader gets taken by the border patrol or something, and it's taking a while, a few days maybe, you don't think that some people might be praying, like usually people are going to pray to God or do some kind of prayer or something. Like, I would think, even if they're doing it privately or if they're like with a church group or something, they're going to automatically start praying together to the God that they worship. So, I don't know. I'm just kind of maybe I'm stretching this too far, but I feel like maybe the ancient Israelites weren't so monotheistic, or else how would they all come to this conclusion in the middle of nowhere, wandering around, being mad at Moses? He goes missing. There's some, all this stuff going on. And then, mind you, before they built the golden calf, they did hear the voice of God, and were very afraid, and there was an earthquake and all these other kind of things, and they were very frightened, and Moses was the one who went and involved himself individually with God. Saw the hem of his garment, all these kinds of things, was shining white. For some reason, he was like glowing or something like that. I don't really know. Sometimes a lot of stuff, I just honestly, I just don't know. But I mean, I try to think about like what would make somebody glow. Like, there's just so much stuff happening in these stories that it's like, sometimes you got to just keep reading, but I tend to get just like stuck. I'm just like, what on earth was happening? But yeah, they did hear the voice of God. They did have that experience where they were deeply terrified, as you should be if you hear some voice coming from God only knows where. or, lightning and thunder and, earthquake type things happening, I mean, yeah, you're gonna get scared. You're in the middle of the desert. Like, you're not, like, protected. And you're in maybe a mountain range, too. I don't know. Like, a desert mountain range? I don't know. Like, I don't know if Mount Sinai is, like, a singular mountain or if it's in a range. Some people say that maybe it wasn't Mount Sinai, there's another mountain. I don't really know. I don't know anything really about, like, which mountains are which. But, it's kind of food for thought, though. Like, the worshiping of the golden calf, like that, I don't think that came from just nowhere. I think it was a moment of desperation of, like, we need to pray because Moses is gone, he's our leader, and we're freaking out over here. Almost like when you're in a plane, if it was gonna go down, or if you're on a cruise ship and something was gonna happen, people pray. That's like a natural thing that you see people doing, even non-religious people. And so I do think that this might have been possibly one of those settings where there were people as a group in a moment of desperation or time period of desperation where they're like, he's our leader, and as much as we're mad, he's got us organized and we're following him, and as much as we're grumbling and groaning in this desert, he's the one who brought us out of Egypt, out of slavery. And so if he's gone, how are we going to survive? We don't even know where we were going, and we don't know how to get there, to the land of milk and honey. So I think something more was going on there. That's like not even two full books of the Bible. But within the first book of Genesis, there's already the question of the name of God and the plural use, which those things never really get explained past that. You never hear where the name El comes from, or Elohim. Later on, God calls himself Yahweh, or a version of that, at the burning bush with Moses. So I don't really know. Now I'm debating, was Moses raised, was that the Prince of Egypt movie, or was that the real story? See, this is how I think. So you guys are kind of getting my whole thought process here. Let me see. Yeah, so Pharaoh's daughter did find baby Moses in the Nile River. And so let me see. So I don't know. I'm so confused. So Moses was very young when he was in Egypt. Let me see. It says that when he went, this isn't in the Bible, this is an explanation, that when he went to live with the Egyptians from a young age, to about the age of 40, he then lived in Midian for another 40 years. That's why he was the shepherd. And he saw the burning bush then. So yeah, it was after then. It was after. So this was after Egypt, and after the wilderness. Wow, that's pretty nuts. Or did he come back to Egypt? I don't know, dude. Was Moses in Egypt in slavery, or did he go to yeah, it says he lived with them for 40 years. So then I guess he must have gone back. I don't really know. I don't know. Forgive me, guys. I'm going to have to look this up and figure that out because I'm getting my timelines are way out of whack. In my head, I was thinking Moses was born, outside of Egypt, was found by Pharaoh's daughter when all the baby boys were being killed, and he was raised there, left near age 40, and then I guess if he left, he must have come back then. If he was gone, he was in Midian, he was a shepherd, saw the burning bush, came back to get the Israelites out of Egypt. So he wasn't living there at the time. Okay. So yeah, I don't know why I was thinking he was raised there and brought the people out of Egypt. Because when I was thinking about the timeline, I'm like, didn't he die at like 120? So where did he go? So yeah, anyways, that's my tangent. My one of many tangents. But those are kind of the types of questions I'm kind of looking into, not to mention my rusty Bible knowledge of lineage that I've mostly forgotten at this point, but I kind of brought myself a little bit back around, but yeah, I didn't do too good with that. But I'm definitely rusty. Have not been studying a lot of that stuff lately. But I'm debating. I'll see if when October 22nd ish rolls around, if I'm gonna decide to do the weekly Parsha readings from the beginning on, or if I'm just gonna leave it alone, or if I'm just gonna focus on holidays, or if I'm just gonna focus on whatever I'm gonna focus on. But yeah, that's and I don't get everything 110% right, so look into this stuff yourself. That's why I put the questions out there. Look up what I say, check it out yourself, read the books yourself if they're interesting to you. Don't listen to this podcast for your primary knowledge and educational source. Usually I'm going with questions I already have, meaning I don't have all the answers. And as you can see, when I think out loud, you can tell that I don't always remember everything. Like, I have good maybe guesses a lot of the times, but I have to kind of talk myself back through, okay, who was what, where, and when, and all this. And then, the little details are kind of missing with a lot of stuff for me. I feel like I've got a general grip on a lot of the major people, but there's some other stuff that I'm just like, just because I was raised around it, I kind of know what's associated with what. But yeah, I definitely get it wrong. I mean, look up things to see the calf. Was that Baal? Is that the same god, or is Baal a bull, like an older animal, or is it a calf? Look up things like the ancient Canaanite religion gods. Was it Asherah, El, and Baal? Were those the main gods? Look up all kinds of stuff, like the stuff I was saying about Noah, the stuff I was saying about Noah and him being who was alive after that, and the Nephilim and those children that were giants, or I don't know what the heck that was all about, and where they went and where they came from. And how did we get all these other races if Noah's the only one, his family, and then that lineage, and kind of what happens in Genesis, what happens in Exodus, with all these people, like I was saying, like the Abram and Sarai versus Abraham and Sarah and Hagar, and Jacob, who becomes Israel, and his brother Esau, Hagar's son Ishmael, with that lineage going more towards Islam. Those are basically the groups that are fighting right now in Israel, are the Jewish Israelite lineage and the lineage that comes from Hagar's Ishmael. Those are the two lineages that are actually fighting against each other a lot of the time. Not necessarily Jews versus Muslims, not necessarily like that. It's more so, Hagar's son, which was the firstborn son in that culture, would have been considered a legitimate son because it's a slave, son, versus the biological blood birth son of Sarai, who she actually is, she was barren, or let's say she was barren, I don't know, could have been, I don't know, it just says she was barren, and then, they get their names changed. Abram becomes Abraham, father of many, or father of nations, or whatever that means. Av meaning father. And yeah, so he gets that name before he even has Jacob. Before he has Isaac. And then Isaac is the one who has Jacob and Esau. And Jacob is Israel. And so, yeah, you have that lineage. And then that lineage is a lot, I guess, younger, because Jacob comes from a couple generations after Ishmael. So yeah, it's long. And then I'm not going to go more into lineage, but the lineages are always an interesting thing too, because you can follow a lot of the stuff that happens in history by the lineage of the people and who they're from and everything. It's kind of interesting how that works. But there's definitely a lot going on in the ancient world, and there still is, but my goodness, it's hard to kind of study history from a religion slash multicultural perspective. Usually the way I've been taught to kind of study history is usually from, your own perspective. I was born in the US, so I study from an American perspective. And usually it's a white American perspective, because that's the one that they give us. And then eventually I started getting more and more curious. I'm like, well, I'm not white, so let me study more about my people. And then I started studying about the groups of people that I'm made up of and where they're from. And I was kind of like, oh, so that's how some of us got here, and then there's some of us we don't know where we came from. But that's kind of how we got here. Not everybody came through slavery, but there were other people in Africa that, from half of my family that is from Africa, they basically, the lineage is very, it just goes all the way back. I don't know how far, because, everybody's got their own stories of how they got where they're going. I just find it interesting that, a lot of people have a religion, a lot of people these days have a religion that might not necessarily be part of their ethnicity, their ethnic or their ethnic religion. I don't know, does that make sense? Because of a lot of the different types of wars for conversion and stuff like that, coming into other tribal places, trying to change people from whatever their tribal religions were to believing in more monotheistic cultures, more about Christianity, Judaism, Islam. It's kind of interesting. Like, I thought about it when I was learning about like Norse pagan culture, because there's some people who are actual Scandinavian people that is their actual historical bloodline background. And then there's people who kind of become into the religion, but that I don't know how common that is, honestly, or uncommon. I don't know enough about it yet, but I mean, those people would have interacted with early Christians, but like there are also people who would have interacted with early Jews, and then wars that happen later on. Like there's just all these different types of like wars and politics and religions and ethnicities and kind of races and different backgrounds of people, that it's kind of hard to really just study one from one perspective, because the more you start diving into these groups, the more you start seeing all these other cultures, that it's kind of hard to understand the Bible by not knowing the cultures that it talks about. So I really started a long time ago with studying more so about Judaism, because it's like, well, I might as well study it because I'm already immersed. I already grew up being immersed in Christianity, so it's like that was just a given. I was going to study that. So I was like, well, let me add to this. And Judaism was the next easiest thing to study, just because it's like, well, the books are right there. They're in the same book. So it's like, you might as well just study that. And all the people in the Bible, the majority of them were Jewish. Some of them weren't in the Old Testament, and then some of them weren't in the New Testament. They were Greeks and other Gentile types and Romans and all these other people that weren't Jewish. There was some intermarrying, and then the Old Testament, you had all these other groups of people too. And so you go from that type of thing into, just not picking apart necessarily, but just like diving more into, things. And I feel like the first place where I start seeing other cultural influence, I mean, Egypt is definitely an influence. And that's such a complex culture to even study. Like, I feel like I'm going to need more years to delve into that culture. I've only delved into it from like the ancient Kemet, the belief of ancient Kemet of, the black culture in Egypt. And that is controversial in itself, but a lot of times, anytime you're talking about black and African people, the majority of the world does not know any of the history. And a lot of the times, let's be real, like the history gets pretty wiped out. If you ask most people, most Americans, most people on the planet to tell them about like an African tribe's history of those people, what's important to them, what kind of foods they eat, what their ancestors did, how they are today, how are their groups different if you take like every 100 years, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, what were they doing at these different time periods? Most people can't tell you a thing. They can tell you what they kind of know a little bit, if there were like major wars and stuff. Most people don't know that. Most people don't know the different tribal groups and where they're from and where they came from and why they left those places and came to other places. Most people don't know any of that stuff. And so, why would people not know about the presence of black people in Egypt? It just naturally comes with the territory of, black history does not really get taught. I don't know how it is in like the Caribbean or in African countries. Like, do they teach better about their own history in their own countries or not? In our country, we in the U.S. are not taught hardly a thing about black people outside of slavery and then Black History Month and all the inventions of black people, and then civil rights and, all these types of things. Like, we're not really taught all that much. I mean, those aren't unimportant things, but like pretty much in the U.S., history starts for the black people with slavery, but there was a lot more going on before slavery happened in the U.S. with different black populations in the Caribbean and Africa and other places in the world. There were black people there doing things. I mean, there's a story in the Old Testament where there's a eunuch that is Ethiopian. Was it old? No, it's the New Testament. That's the New Testament. There's an Ethiopian eunuch, that comes across. I think it was Paul when he was Saul or something. And there's a I don't know. I don't want to get into the history of like ancient Kemet, but look it up, see what you think. I studied under a professor named Dr. Thomas Parham. He has a lot of information about ancient Kemet, some books, probably lectures online by this point, and yeah, he's a big voice for that. That's the first place I ever heard about it, was in undergrad, at UCI of all places. But he basically taught that class. I remember there being some conflicting ideas. I remember it being one of the more interesting classes, and there were only myself and one other black student. Everyone else in that class was not a black person. Just because the population at that school, at least during when I was there, was not a very heavily black population at all. Like, I would go days without seeing another black person. Like I didn't live on campus though, but I would go for a very long length of time without seeing black people around. But that's not really what I'm talking about so much. But like, yeah, just thinking in history, just in general, you don't really hear a lot about black kingdoms and different cultures. I mean, there are a lot of very organized tribal groups, a lot of, architectural, just great architectural things that were destroyed throughout history. A lot of people being displaced and westernized, I mean, to the fullest, till it looks like a lot of history seems almost erased. It's like, it's pretty sad to see like a whole continent like that. But a lot of the African tribes were some of the most amount of tribal groups around the world to still be getting, not, I don't even believe that they should need to get connected to Western civilization, society. If they want to live how they want to live, that's fine. Just like any group, if they want to live how they want to live, I feel like that's perfectly fine. I think you guys would know by now that that's how I feel. But yeah, like it's kind of just interesting to see all these kind of different scenarios Well, this audio recording went far longer than I had expected. I thought I was gonna record like 10 minutes, and I probably was honestly done closer to 20 minutes, but then I just kept talking. But yeah, I mean, it's all interesting stuff, but I mean, I like studying things sometimes from a perspective that's just like way out there, and that's why I do this, just because sometimes it's easier for me to kind of hear myself talk out loud, because then I'm like, well, now I know what I definitely don't know, because in my head when I'm just thinking through a story, I'm just like, oh, like this makes sense, but then when I start talking about it, I'm like, just like I mentioned, like, oh, I don't remember this lineage or like whatever. I can tell what I kind of need to kind of brush up on for sure. There's just so many moving pieces too. I don't really commit a lot of this stuff to memory. For me, it's fine to not be having to have it as memory. But I am very, very, very interested in the origins of things. Like, I'm kind of like, okay, let's go one more step. Let's go one more step back. Let's keep going back, as far as we can go back. It's just kind of an interesting thing. Like, I'm like, why not? Why not go back? To see what was going on in these different places with different groups of people at different times. How did we get where we are now, I think about that a lot, and I'm just like, that's what keeps me questioning, honestly, is like when I think, okay, like all the times, not all the times, but like, going into a church or something like that. Like, I don't know. I'm not going to talk about much like that, but going into a church or some space like that, that's kind of how I ask, is like, okay, there's this something simple where somebody says, like, at a church, it's good to learn the Lord's Prayer, and it's like, okay, cool. Well, where'd the Lord's Prayer come from? It has its history in the type of a Jewish prayer. Okay, well, where'd those prayers come from? They came from somewhere else. There's modern day prayer books that you can get that have prayers that would be similar to things that Jews would have been praying in older times, things that Jesus would have been praying, similar to that kind of stuff. And then you think about it and you're like, oh, these are really old prayers. Like, you can see the history of some of these prayers and stuff. And then you're like, okay, so this one's close. This is probably the Lord's Prayer kind of originated out of this other one. Jesus was the one that was teaching it. Jesus talks other places about prayer. Like, you see Jesus praying. It's interesting. Okay, he's going to teach the people to pray the Lord's Prayer. But then early mornings, while it's pretty much still dark out, he goes off and he's praying by himself. So what's he praying if he's teaching these people to pray like this? And so it's kind of like he's doing something. Maybe he's praying the Lord's Prayer over and over and over again. I don't know. Like, it doesn't really say. Like, I'm not trying to make fun of it. I'm just saying, like, I don't know. Sometimes just the way I say things just sounds really, like, I've got a little bit of, like, I like to kind of joke, but I'm not really trying to make fun of things, like, in a teasing, disrespectful way. I'm just kind of like, I don't know. I don't think that it is wrong to, like, laugh at, like, things that in the Bible just seem kind of like, okay, like, that wouldn't make any sense, but, like, nobody clarifies, but that's the kind of way that I think. I'm like, okay, like, if there's this Lord's Prayer, where did it come from, and where did Jesus get it? Why is he saying this? Why did the other people not teach it that way? And what's he, talking about in his prayers? Because it seems to be lengthier on his end. And, his disciples notice that he goes off to pray by himself, but what are they doing? Are they praying? I remember there was an example where Jesus told told them to pray, and Jesus comes back and they're like sleeping. Um, and so it's kind of like, okay, was he praying late at night too? Like, what was going on? You know, it's like, I don't really know. Like, it's completely confusing. I mean, it doesn't have to be, you know, you can just read it word for word and just take it as is. But sometimes I'm like, hey, you know, if this is the book that people are saying is like the best one, then why can't I just dive all in every angle possible? You know, like, and there's so many books I haven't read, you know. I haven't read like Hindu scriptures or Buddhist scriptures or, you know, a lot of different major religions scriptures. I mean, I've read the Quran, but it's short and it's easier to read than most types of scriptures, at least in my opinion. And it interested me so much that I just read it. I read it. I wouldn't say I study it. A little bit, but not anytime recently. Probably in like my freshman year of high school. I don't remember studying it too much outside of then. I studied a little bit of Arabic, just a tad, not much. I don't remember even less than I even studied. And then, yeah, I mostly got connected to the music, the musical quality of it, how people do those like readings from the scriptures, from the Quran, how they would, you know, do it. They would recite it with like a kind of like a chant singing, like a, I don't know what you call like a classical singing type of way. And then outside of the singing, that type of singing, that very traditional singing from the Quran, just kind of how the prayers sound and everything. Yeah, just that kind of stuff. And then back like right after I graduated high school, around the time I graduated high school, when there was the war in Iraq going on near that time, because September 11th happened during my senior year. It was like one of the first few weeks of school, I think, in my senior year of high school. And so, yeah, that happened. And then, but, you know, I got pretty interested in, you know, Islam compared to, you know, what the extremist beliefs are, because I started hearing a lot of weird propaganda type of stuff in the media. But I was like, you know, I'd already read the Quran before, because this happened when I was in a public school, and I was at a private school when I read the Quran, because I had a friend that was Muslim, and he had a Quran with him, and he let me borrow it, because I didn't know like what to ask for. So I took it to the library and I was like, do you have this book here? And they showed me where they were, and I borrowed one from the library and read the library one at my house. And then I brought it back to my friend, and you know, kind of told some people in the class, you know, what I thought about the Quran, because I was just like, this book is pretty cool. That's probably why this guy's so nice, because of all the stuff it says about how to be and stuff. And, you know, so I took that belief with me of kind of what I had read in the Quran, and this guy and his family that I knew in high school that were really great, nice people, very kind people. And then when September 11th happened, then I started hearing all this stuff about Muslims and all this stuff about Islam. And I was like, that can't be right. Because the only Muslim people I know are like amazing. Like, there's no way that that is associated with them. So I really was able to question a lot of that stuff. And I never believed in a lot of the stuff that I would hear in the news about like Muslims and stuff. I was just kind of like, wow, like they're totally being discriminated against. And I could see that that idea was being kind of like, you know, upheld so that when people saw on the news Muslim women, Muslim men getting, you know, like attacked and all these things, then people would be like, well, yeah, well, these people are just like wild, crazy people, you know, like that are burning Americans and killing each other and all this kind of other stuff, and like ranting and raving and throwing rocks and all these things. And it's like, but yeah, those are the people that you see on the TV, you know, like those aren't the actual Muslims that you see just like wandering around in your city, who've lived in your neighborhoods all this time. You know, like they're not the same people. Like there's something definitely going on. So I kind of was able to realize they're using this label incorrectly. Like, yeah, those people might call themselves Muslims on the TV, the ones that are shouting around and doing all these things, but it doesn't mean that they represent the whole of Islam. I mean, Iraq is not, I mean, it's big, it's a big country, it's heavily populated, but there's so many Muslims in the world. Very huge religion. It's a giant religion. The people in Iraq are not the only Muslims that exist. If you were going to go to war with Muslims, I mean, I don't even know if that would be possible, because there are so many Muslims all over the world. I mean, like, I don't think any one nation could go to war against all the Muslims. Like, there's so many of them. Like, I'm not saying that they're going to try to fight you, but I'm just saying, like, you know, like, it's just, it's a huge population of people. So, I mean, yeah, fighting against one country that has some crazies in it, that's different than fighting against Islam, you know, fighting against Muslim people. But, yeah, I was able to see that when I was kind of younger. And it's just kind of those types of experiences that keep me getting pretty interested in different aspects of history. Not so much the religions, but that's kind of the part of it that interests me the most, is the religions. Also like food and stuff like that, but that's kind of easier to come by. Just like, you know, I live in LA, live in San Diego, like you can find food from almost anywhere. Without having to, I mean, yeah, it's going to be like a certain portion of the type of food, or maybe in a little bit more Americanized because of our American palate type of thing, but, and the ingredients, maybe you can't just import everything all the time, so you might have to make a different version of it, but we're still exposed to a lot of food easily. We're not so much exposed to like history of different religions and how they're connected. I like the connectedness too. That's why things like, you know, like Ishmael and like, you know, Isaac and that kind of thing, like, you know, how things are connected, how the people are fighting. That's kind of why you hear like in Israel people saying a lot, oh, like we're cousins, you know, we're cousins with the Arabs or whatever, like whoever's called the Palestinians and all this other, I don't know who's called what in all honesty, but yeah, it's I have fun with it, you know. I'm not getting mad at it. I know sometimes I sound like probably really serious when I'm talking, but I'm not like angry. I'm just kind of like, I just get a little, when I'm thinking a lot, that's kind of how I talk. I'm just kind of like straight to the point. But this is way over longer than I thought it was going to be, but this is how I've entertained myself for the night. So I've had a good night. I've had fun. This is actually fun for me, believe it or not. I do this for fun, so I mean, if it wasn't fun, I wouldn't do it. I mean, nobody's forcing me. Like, I don't make a living off of this. Like, nobody's forcing me. I do this for fun. So, but yeah, I really don't want to sound disrespectful, and I don't want to sound like I know everything. Like, definitely look this stuff up, you guys. If I had to wait to record something until I was 100% right, I would hardly ever record anything. But if I had to know for a fact that I'm right, but I try to at least ask the questions, and I'm sure I'm not the only one with the questions, or if other people kind of like this style of looking into things. I mean, I have my own beliefs and my own faith in what I believe in and what I put my faith in, and that's how that is. I don't feel like I have to describe it to anybody, but it's yeah, I'm not saying I don't believe in anything or question everything to not believe it, but I like to have fun with the stuff I was raised learning, because I have a pretty deep foundation in it, and I like to challenge the stuff that I was taught, not because I think it's wrong, but because I find it interesting just to challenge things. I mean, that's how I like to learn. I don't think of it as a bad thing, but I know some people don't like, what is it called, that cognitive dissonance, or that kind of when you can't really hold two of the same beliefs, that kind of duality of things. I've become very comfortable with that. Sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I'm like, how can that person believe this thing and say this stuff and blah, 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 blah. And then I'm just to them, they're right, who am I to say that they're wrong and that I'm more right than them? And who am I, to do that? So, they could potentially be equally as right as I am. At this point, that's kind of how I feel. Everybody's as equally right as any other person. That's honestly what I think, is because we're all seeing things from our own perspectives, and those of us who study those things, we're going to study them the way that we want to believe, and then if we pick to believe in it, it's a choice to believe in something. You can believe in anything, if you try to, and if you study solely in that direction, anything can be true enough. You can think that there's potential for other things to be true and believe and only follow one thing or none of them. You can kind of, my kind of version is pick what I feel like is right for me, regardless of what, evidence is found elsewhere. I kind of know where I stand with things. I'm able to kind of question stuff and then come back to kind of okay. But, yeah, it's interesting stuff. Too many questions in one recording here, and I did not mean to go on this long, but I feel like I'm just gonna go to sleep anyways. So this is the last thing, pretty much one of the last things I'm gonna be doing for my night, and thanks for listening.